Thank you. I just want to say a few words also about the work of the Institute, what we're doing before I launch into character. But the Institute for North America is one of a number of institutes, as Alex mentioned, around the world. And our particular mission that we share in common is to ignite hearts for greatness and to raise up a new generation of virtuous leaders empowered to transform the world. And here, I want to share with you what we've just launched an initiative to bring everything that you're going to see in a very practical way into schools. Because our mission is to transform society. It's to, in some ways, ignite a moral revolution, a transformation in society with the way that we approach leadership and the way that our leaders approach life. And of course, to do that, if you want to really transform a society, schools is the obvious place we want to go to bring up the next generation of virtuous leaders. Because imagine the difference that it can make, putting into practice the virtues of magnanimity, humility, cardinal virtues, all these things, making certain decisions very early on sets you in a position to continue to make similar decisions, the exponential growth that can have in the person. And so what we've launched this fall here, just 6 weeks ago, we started providing professional development workshops for teachers to provide them with the common vocabulary and empower them with the tools and resources necessary to bring out the greatness in their students, to put these things into practice in the classroom, to begin to form and train their students to become virtuous leaders. Because, as you will see, leadership is not the calling of the few, but of the many. It's not a matter of technique, but it is a function of character. It has to flow from who you are. It has to flow from who you are, because you can think of leadership, oftentimes when we look at leadership, we think management. And that comes to certain technical aspects, things I must do to achieve some outcome, getting from point A to point B. But undergirding that, real leadership, and these are necessary things, but undergirding must have at its heart, at its root, character, heart. The leader has to be a human being. Otherwise, your job can be better performed by some sort of complex algorithm that can, adjust things just right to make sure the conditions, and we can manipulate people, and then we can manipulate machines, and humans become obsolete. But real human leadership is something that comes from heart. And this is not something that is soft or sentimental. This is about virtues. And as we will see, the virtues are about becoming more human. First, we must understand what is a virtue. Oftentimes, I think in the parlance of our times, we hear the word virtue and we think something like principles or values. There's no shortage of things in values-based leadership, principled leadership. But a virtue is something different. Virtues eat values for breakfast, right? Just as culture eats strategy. And virtues eat values for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because virtues are safe. Virtues are something external to the person. They're something you write down on a piece of paper and you put on your wall. A nice inspirational picture behind it. Or values. Values are safe. Values are something you put on a wall. Values are something that you write down. They're outside of the person. Values are fundamentally outside of the person, because the word value means something that I hold important, that I feel is important. If you feel is important, we can maybe agree on certain values that we hold together as being important. If we hold these values, it doesn't take much to change our minds and hold these values. This is now what's important to us for one reason or another. They're also very changeable. But they're safe because they do not implicate me. There's something outside. I can point to them. Well, these are our values. Don't talk to me, right? Don't find out who I actually am. Don't expect anything of me, because you find out I'm not a real leader. So I tell you, these values are out there. We can look at the mask and hide behind the mask of our values. No, virtues are necessarily implicate the personal. There are no virtues apart from that which is actually instantiated in you. You either have a virtue or you don't. It's not something that you can hold on to, because a virtue comes down to who you are. There's a difference between having and being. Your virtues make you what you are. This is your character. Now, the word virtue is not a religious word. It's not a spiritual word. It's a theological. There are in the Christian tradition, there are faith, hope, and charity are supernatural virtues. This is not what we're speaking of. We're speaking of the natural human virtues. This is a matter of anthropology, of psychology, but not psychology like manipulating people, but it's just written into our very biology. Now, the word virtue itself means strength, force, like a force of gravity. It's a strength, a power. These are not soft skills. These are powers. And to provide, I think, even a more fuller understanding, appreciation of what we mean when we talk about virtue, is that the Greek word, arete, the Greek word for virtue is arete. So when Aristotle, Plato, these guys are writing about virtue millennia ago, they're writing about the word arete. And arete means excellence. Arete means excellence. And so Aristotle talks in the same breath about a virtuous person. He talks about a virtuous knife. It's excellent. It's excellent at being a knife. What makes for a virtuous knife? It's strong, sharp, and it gets the job done. Same principle applies to human beings. What makes for a virtuous person is somebody who is good at being a human person. A good person is someone who is good at being a human person. Virtues are not something outside of us. They're not foreign to us. They're capacities of the human heart. Heart, mind, and will. Capacities of the human being. So when you develop virtues, you're developing strengths. You're developing actual habits of excellence at being human. And when you are excellent at being human, you live a good life. You are made whole. You are integrated. You're made solid. And as we'll see, there are virtues of the intellect and the will, but also the virtues of the heart, which are the essence of leadership. Because when you have not only the virtues of the mind and the will, but the virtues of the heart, that is leadership, you become a real leader, not just an excellent human being, but you become capable of excellently leading other human beings. There are 4 virtues which are the foundation of leadership. These have been traditionally referred to as the cardinal virtues. You may be familiar with prudence, justice, courage, self-mastery, formerly known as temperance. The first of these is prudence. Prudence is par excellence a virtue of the intellect and the will. It is about knowing the right course of action and putting it into action. Each of these virtues is twofold. They have 2 dimensions. You might think of it as a contemplative dimension and an active dimension in the case of prudence and of magnanimity. But they have 2 dimensions to them. The 2 dimensions of prudence. And prudence, it's important because we have a tendency to use the word prudence to mean, well, maybe we should be more cautious. I don't know if that would be prudent. We shouldn't do that. Don't make that decision. It wouldn't be prudent. Prudence is not this. Prudence is practical wisdom. There's an element of circumspection, of not being rash, for sure. But prudence is about considering, deliberation, embracing the truth of the reality before you, to take advice from other people, to really take in the whole situation so that you know what the right course of action is. But it is also, and this is where so often we miss the mark on this skill, on this habit, this excellence, is it's just as much about decisiveness. You need to make a decision, especially in an age where we are inundated by information. You've heard the term analysis paralysis, right? Indecision, so many options, I can't go buy jeans without having 50 options in front of me. I don't know what to do. Right? God forbid I look for a book online. That's type in to Google anything that's how or what or why, and you've got too many options. You're gone. You think you're just going to look for a quick answer. 6 hours later, it's 2 in the morning, and you're still there. Oh, yeah, okay, wow. I never knew that happened in the Battle of 1812. You know how you got there, right? It's the ability to take information and then put things into action, which means recognizing the limitations of our very fact that we're created, right? We're not infinite, which means you'll never know all the right information. You'll never know all the facts. So you cannot expect certainty where certainty cannot exist. Like in everyday life, real life. You'll never know all the data, all the information that you need to make a decision. So if your definition of prudence is one of being cautious, you can be infinitely prudent. You can be infinitely cautious and never make a decision, never act. Put these things into action, gather enough information, but there's a certain point where you need to decide. You just need to put the jeans on and walk out. Pay for them first, but right. And then we just, one leg at a time, then we go. You need to make a decision. So not expecting certainty where certainty cannot exist. You'll never know the future. We'll never know the future. So we need to be able to make decisions, informed decisions, which also means we need to overcome our fear of mistakes. To overcome our fear of mistakes and act. Right? You can only steer a moving vehicle. I mean, you can maybe, wrench that wheel a little bit. The best, easiest vehicle to steer and direct is one that's already in motion. So you need to act, to try, to discover, to do, to move forward. And this also means, and I know there are those among us who, because of our temperament, which will become clear in time, there's certain of us that, and you know who you are as soon as I say this, you say, yeah, I've made a decision. That's what we're going to go with. What'd you do about it? I've decided. And we'll do it when the time is right. You feel good. You have all the options in front of you, and you write your list. Yeah, I wrote the list of what I'm going to do today. I've decided. I have been productive. I've been productive. Have you done anything? No, but I'll get to it. I'll get to it. It's not just about an internal movement of committing to some course of action. Decisiveness, you have to follow through, right? You're going to shoot hoops. You don't just, and then you have to follow through. You have to follow through. The internal movement of the will to say, yes, this is what we will do, and then you actually do it. Some of us, this comes very easy to do. It's that first part that we need to, considering what the course of action is. But others of us struggle much more with actually then putting that decision into action, because it's not a real decision if you haven't actually done it. It's not just an intellectual thing, but it's a matter of the will, and that will must flow out into real action. The second of these fundamental virtues, the foundation of leadership, is courage. This is the virtue, the habit of staying the course, starting the course, and staying the course. The two dimensions of courage are audacity and endurance. Audacity is boldness. You must check that your goals and means are just, and you need to learn to run risks. The recognition that nothing in this world is going to be perfect as it is in our ideal of it, but to run the risks anyway, informed risks, responsible risk-taking. If we do not take risks, you cannot have any upshot. You're never going to. Getting out of bed is a risky business. Right? Getting out of bed is risky business. If you never took risks, you'd never do anything. We need to learn to take risks, have that habit of taking risks, the right kinds of risks. This is audacity, this is boldness. But just as important is the other dimension of courage, which is not just to jump in to the fray. Some people find it very easy to start a lot of things. The next day, you still got to get up and do it. You still got to be out there, working, putting up with difficulties, suffering the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. You need to not just act, but persevere, to endure. To persist in the face of obstacles. There's different elements of endurance. There's when things are difficult, we face with obstacles, with opposition, to be able to stay the course. That's strength. That's a kind of strength that's required. But there's also the difficulty of the fact that some things just take a long time by their very nature. They take time. We may not face open opposition, but to face the opposition, that face that stares at us, of the sheer boredom of day in and day out, showing up and doing what must be done. That passive obstacle. There's also an element of endurance. Because it can be easy for some people to be the hero of a moment, but it's also necessary to live each moment heroically, each moment of the day heroically. And in fact, to get into some of the practical psychology of virtues, if you're not doing these things in these small, everyday practices, you don't actually develop the virtue. The virtues, as I said, are strengths. You might think of each of these four fundamental virtues as muscle groups. It's a nice analogy. They're muscle groups because if you wanted to get really technical, they're composed themselves of many other smaller muscles, many other smaller virtues, all elements of the same thing. And to develop a virtue, you must exercise these muscles. So to develop the virtue of prudence, you must exercise deliberation and decisiveness and carrying out these decisions in action in very small things. You start with small weights before you go on to the big heavy lifting. This is the same with developing your character, the same with these virtues. To develop the virtue of courage, you need to take the audacity, to take the risk to get out of bed in the morning. That might be a first start. But then we can build off of that. And you continue to strengthen, right? You go to the level of where it becomes difficult, and you keep pushing. And then you go from there. And to live each moment of the day heroically, you become strong, you're able to endure. The third of these fundamental virtues is self-mastery. This has conventionally been known perhaps as temperance, but the word temperancia does not mean what temperance has come to mean in the American lexicon. It's not, as in the 19th century, it does not mean abstinence from alcohol. It's not that. Thankfully. It's also not a matter of just self-control. I'm going to somehow crush my desires in my mind vice and restrain myself. This is not it. Self-mastery is the habit of directing the passions. It might seem like an archaic word, but the passions is a convenient concept to encompass both emotions, our feelings, but also our desires. Our emotions and desires, that which is moved within us by those things outside of us, that which is attracted to something. The two dimensions of self-mastery are equally subduing evil passions and energizing noble passions. It's not merely a matter of reining in my emotions and desires. They have a very necessary place. We must also activate and energize the noble emotions and desires. And in fact, this image you see, this woman, you can see the emotion on her face. She is engaged in a very difficult task. The emotions are necessary. They are a necessary part of our life. They're a necessary part of making decisions and carrying out those decisions into action. Emotions are what give us the strength to follow through when things are difficult. Because you cannot reason through the right things. You can reason to the right things. But to actually put something into action requires our body, our biology, our physicality, which is where the emotions are. Because a human being isn't just a brain on a stick or some machine. It's got a real biological life. It's written into this. This woman, this is from a famous painting, and is from a story from the Bible where this woman, Judith, is cutting off the head of the tyrant Holofernes. He brings her into his tent. She very courageously, the audacity to go there, because their city is under siege by this foreign invader, this tyrant. And, he invites her to drink with him. So she has one drink for her, another two for you, one drink for me, two for you, right? Until he sleeps. He falls asleep. He passes out and falls asleep. The very gruesome and difficult task that she is faced with, she can only carry out by mastering herself and energizing her noble emotions and desires to carry out what must be done. To rise up in the face of injustice requires emotions. We need to be able to direct our biological strength to stand up to tyrants, to enact what is just, to be able to serve those who on the surface of it might simply seem inconvenient to serve or annoying. It requires our emotions. We need to direct our emotions and desires in a way that is befitting to the nobility of the human person to carry out the difficult tasks. The fourth of these fundamental virtues is justice. Justice is not a legal construct. Justice is something fundamentally human, and even before it is interpersonal, it's fundamentally within myself. Things must be rightly ordered within myself. Justice is the habit of giving to each person what is due to him or her. What is due to him or her. The two dimensions of justice are communion and communication, and working for the common good. Communion and communication is really two ways of saying the same thing. Communication is not, real authentic human communication is not merely a transactional interaction between two parties. I say something, and you say something, and maybe the wires cross just right, and we were able to communicate with each other. There's communication skills, and technically these are properly more part of self-mastery, as you know. Control your tongue. You got to say the right thing. Say what you mean what you say. It's a matter of self-mastery. But justice, where does this fit into justice? This is into justice because what is due to another person is, at an intellectual level, fundamentally the truth. You owe this to them. But not only that, not only truthfulness, sincerity, and simplicity, but also empathy, friendship, love. These are matters of justice. Is what is owed to the other person as another human person. And the idea of communion, this being a matter of communion, what does this mean? Entering into communione, entering into union with one another, because we can look at this as a very deep, interpersonal, humanistic, sort of almost spiritual level of entering into a relationship with another person. But it also simply describes the raw sort of physics of what happens when we communicate. In fact, what's happening right now is there's some sort of complex neurological phenomenon happening in my brain space. And there's vibrations of this thing inside my throat as air flows through it, and I flap my tongue against my teeth. And I presume at this point that, well, I know, because I can also hear, molecules in the air are vibrating, some sort of strange pattern of frequency. And I'm assuming that as these particles bombard your face and among other things eventually make it through a small membrane inside your inner ear, I'm presuming that you must be understanding me at some point because of the way that you're looking at me. So this thought that has been in my heart, in my mind, has come through this strange auditory chamber and come out and entered into your own hearts because you understand me. And reciprocally, I know you understand me because I can see you. And the very fact that I can see you is because light, whether it's particles or waves, depending on how you measure it, which is crazy, is hitting you and reflecting off of your faces and your eyeballs, piercing, bouncing all over the room, piercing into my eyeballs. And somehow there's a neurological phenomenon where I can see you. I can see you, and I can see you as a person. And I know from the expressions of your faces that you understand me. You see, I have entered into you, and you have entered into me. It's the phenomenon of communication between human beings. So you enter into communion with one another through communication, and we owe to one another fundamentally the truth in sincerity, but also because I understand you and you understand me, and I can understand that you understand me means you must be another I like I am. You are a person. So now I owe to you infinitely anything that I would expect from myself. Love, friendship, respect, the truth. The other dimension of justice is working for the common good. Working for the common good. Industriousness. Working for the common good in our work. When you work, we must do good work. We must work well. This is our contribution to humanity. It's our contribution to our small space of the cosmos that has been entrusted to us. We work well. When we all work well together, we build a beautiful world. But it's not just in the office or in the fields or wherever it is that I work, but at home, domesticity, working for the common good in the home, is the fundamental unit of society. This is where we have children, we're raising up children, and even before and after children, before children are born and after children are gone, we build up these deep relationships in the home and in our life. We work towards the common good, which then also, we all do this together. This is working for the common good in society, citizenship, the way that we engage with one another in the civic order to work for the common good, for justice for all, to give to each one that is due at an individual level, in my work, in my family life, and then also working together to contribute to the good of society, which creates the ideal conditions for human flourishing, so that those generations after me can also receive what is due to them. Now, those are the foundational virtues, the fundamental virtues, the basis of leadership, the foundation of leadership. The virtues of the intellect and the will. But we cannot neglect the heart. The heart. The virtues of the heart are magnanimity and humility. These virtues of the heart, if you think of these like muscle groups, the analogy follows. These are these are at the heart of the matter, but they're simpler virtues, purer in that way. The heart is where the intellect and the will is the arena where the intellect, the will, and the emotions all come together. The heart is the core of the human person. You are your heart. You are not your intellect, you are not your will, but you are your heart. And the virtues of the heart are magnanimity and humility. Magnanimity is the habit of striving towards great things. Magnanimity, the word, comes from magnus animus, great-heartedness, great spirit, striving after greatness. Aristotle used to say, the ancient Greeks in general, Roman philosophers said that magnanimity, they identified the magnanimous man as one who considers himself worthy of great things. This is fine, worthy of great things. But there's a fundamental shift in the 13th century philosopher, theologian in Europe named Thomas Aquinas, radically enhances the definition by adding one word. Aristotle says a magnanimous man is one who considers himself worthy of great things. Aquinas says the magnanimous man is one who considers himself worthy of doing great things. It's not just about receiving honors. Oh, sure, you're good at this. Of course I'm good at this. It's very good. It's right that you should praise me for this. It's a good step. But it's also about doing great things. I am worthy. You are worthy of accomplishing great things. Because the two dimensions of magnanimity are contemplation and action. You must generate a vision for greatness and translate that vision, that dream, into concrete action, to bring it into reality. So, on the contemplative side of magnanimity is the awareness of your own personal dignity, the awareness of your strengths and your talents, and the ability to dream, and to dream big. Dreams that are befitting the nobility and the dignity of who you are. And then the active dimension of magnanimity, to take these dreams and to put them into action, to transform them into a mission for my life, what I must become and what I must do. And it's not just the awareness of my personal dignity, but it's the actual affirmation of that personal dignity. Not just the awareness of my talents and strengths, but the affirmation of my talents and strengths by putting them into action at the service of others. You see, the eyes. There's a painting of Paul of Tarsus. He's got his hand on a book, right? The book of his letters. He's got his hand, and it's resting there. But even the way that his finger is bent, if we could see more clearly as it kind of fades out with the light, but if you could see clearly that bend in his finger on the book is the same movement, visual movement, as in the creation of Adam, as Adam's leg in Michelangelo's creation of Adam in the Sistine Chapel, right? Oh, you know, that one, right? Think of that. You see, Adam is there, God's finger, and then Adam is like this. And Adam's laying there, but his finger's up. It seems like, oh yeah, he's just laying there. But when you look closely, you see in his leg is this tension, this movement like a runner about to take off from the starting blocks. The same finger as he rests on a book, a contemplation. He's ready to move, and his eyes are gazing off towards something with intensity and focus. This is contemplation and action. He's able to achieve a vision of greatness, and he's at the verge. there's a word in Italian, they say, when you're about to do something, they say, sta per, like, sto per andare, I am about to go. It means I stand for to go. Like you're standing at the threshold, he's ready to move into action. So he takes this and he's about to move into action. The other virtue of the heart is humility. Now, magnanimity and humility are not opposites. It's not greatness and smallness, no. They're two sides of the same coin. Two sides of the same coin, just as you have two sides of your heart. Boom, boom. Magnanimity and humility must work in tandem. You cannot have real magnanimity without humility. You do not have real humility without magnanimity. Now, humility is the habit of knowing oneself and serving others. It's the habit of living in the truth about oneself and about others. Humility starts in self-knowledge and flows out into service. I will go more into detail in this later. But it starts with self-knowledge. Knowledge of your createdness, the fact that you are not God, you are not infinite, you are not self-generated. You're a person with a history and a past that precedes you by centuries and generations. You enter into it. Awareness of your flaws. We see this every day, right? The things I'm not good at, my own moral failings. But also the awareness of your dignity, of your talents, your worth, and those things that you're good at. It's awareness of what you are, human being, with limits. And God, I'm not limitless. I'd be all over the place. Then you would be a hot mess, quite literally. What you are and who you are. I'm not just a human being. I'm this particular human being. A man or a woman with a name and a history and a life. Your personal identity. And also how you are. What kind of person are you? What are your talents? What are the strengths? What are the things you're good at and not good at? There's all of these things. Self-knowledge. Because when you fully embrace and live in the truth about yourself, genuine self-acceptance allows it to flow out into authentic self-gift in service to others. Service is the active part of humility. Humility is like the DNA thread that runs through all the virtues. Without magnanimity and humility, you cannot be a leader. Without magnanimity and humility, you cannot develop the other virtues to their fullness. These are the virtues of the heart. And this service is service of helping others, providing to them, and helping them to grow. Because when I serve people, I'm serving human beings. I'm not just serving animals. I'm not just providing input for machines. And we'll go more into the implications of that when we look at how we understand virtuous leadership as a whole system. The humility is the habit of knowing yourself, living in the truth about yourself, and how that then flows out into serving others as other human persons, as other selves. So these are the virtues. These are the 6 virtues of virtuous leadership. The 4 cardinal virtues form the foundation of leadership. The 2 virtues of the heart, magnanimity and humility. But now, the virtues, these strengths, if you remember, these powers of being the human being, these excellences at being human being, this is your character, this shape your character. But your character is built on the foundation of your temperament. The raw material is your temperament. Thank you.